Welcome to Grounds for Peace, a Faith Unfiltered podcast series grounded in faith, community, and courage, where we explore what it looks like to follow Jesus, the peaceful one, and engage in vital conversations that take a hard and hopeful look at peacemaking in today's world. I'm Blake Smith, and I am here with my good friend Linda Stanbridge, who I would say a member of the team because she has been both guest and host, and she is the driver behind the series that we've been doing because of her passions. So I'm just grateful to have her here at Faith Unfiltered Podcast. And I'm not really your host. We're doing this together. We're going to try to make this as much of a conversation as possible. I will admit that before we started recording, I admitted to Linda that I just have so many questions. It's hard not to sound like an interviewer, but I'm really looking forward to this conversation. We're going to be talking about a topic that Linda is especially passionate about. And if you've been following us over the last several weeks, you might know that we have been focusing on the ongoing crisis and war in Gaza, and specifically talking about the impact that it's having on Palestinians. Linda, you kind of kicked this off. You were inspired by this. Maybe you could start us with a little summary of what got you going on this, and how did this come about and why it matters?
Sure. Yeah, thank you for asking that question. It's important for all of us when we're getting involved in advocacy and in tough topics to think about the why we're here and what makes us passionate about it. There's a lot of things about the crisis that's ongoing that really speak to me, but I think particularly as a minister and a parent, I am compelled by the amount of suffering that I see being borne by children, particularly in Gaza. I think the last time that I looked at the data was when we came back from the Churches for Middle East Peace Conference. Was the death toll for children alone is over 20,000, and that's a number that should catch your breath. I have kids; they're 8 and 11, and my kids we live in Michigan. My kids love to play Barbies. They love to swim in Lake Huron. And I look at these pictures of Gaza, and you can see parts where it's seated along the sea, and there's a shore there. And I just imagine what it's like to be a child in a refugee camp, and think about my kids closest to the water. And I just know those children must feel so many of the same things and deserve to feel the same safety that my kids feel. And so I think for me, it is the immense suffering, in the area in general, but we know that children are so vulnerable in conflict, and they're often some of the, biggest categories of victims with so little power over their own lives. And so that, to me, that it really just calls my concern. I think this is something I've cared about for some time, but the urgency for me has really come since the escalating violence that started in the fall of 2023, and really the increase in humanitarian crisis and the forced starvation and genocide has to me really brought in the forefront of my mind what my prophetic responsibility as a leader is, and what my responsibility is to the Palestinians.
I think one of the things that captured my attention just recently as we've been working on this series, I realized as I was looking at my news feed that the idea of this issue in Gaza has just kind of disappeared. It's just faded away. And I know that it's not gone. And yet I had not until just this morning, actually, gone in to search and see if they're even producing stories about it anymore. You talked about the escalation of it, and now other things seem to have taken precedent. That's, I think, for me, it was this kind of remembering, not an aha moment like this is the first time I've thought about it, but a remembering of how easy we can be led astray by the news cycle to think something has been solved.
Yes. Yeah, and I think it's really important for us to name that is intentional. That these are decisions that are made by, not to sound like a conspiracy theorist, but these are decisions that are made by people, whether we're going to cover the ongoing crisis, whether it's going to be a priority in the news cycle. And if we'll talk more about it too, I imagine, but, our representatives, our elected representatives, also need to keep that in front of our minds. There's a lot of people who have a responsibility to keep that in front of us, even though the news cycle is intentionally endlessly stressful, I think. But I think part of the reason that we're seeing some of the oppressing of the content that's coming out, particularly about Gaza, is because I think that their opinions are shifting. I think people are starting to see in a way that we haven't seen before that in this situation, Israel is becoming a bully. While Israelis have a right to a dignified life and peace and freedom and safety, I think for the first time, people are starting to see that what's happening there isn't just about, Israelis having a state that they deserve and a place to be safe, that there's something else that's happening here. People are starting to see the obvious genocide, the forced starvation, part of the, settler colonizer attitudes that we're starting to see coming out of Israel it's not new, but it's more aggressive since 2023. I think the current administration we have has allowed for and endorsed that in some ways. But people's opinions about what's happening in Gaza, I think, is starting to shift. And so I think we're going to see some suppressing of that content. Because the internet has brought us blessings and curses, but it's so much easier to find that information now. So it makes some sense to oppress that. I think if part of your motivation is to endorse the project of what's happening there.
Yeah, thinking about, there's so much that you just said that I'd like to respond to, but I don't want to get ahead of us of our conversation. But I want to just kind of make a note. Your comment that our current administration, but it's really kind of all of us, our inactivity, our whatever. And I always wonder when these kinds of things happen about our role in it.
Yeah.
And sometimes, we think, well, our role, I didn't do anything. Well, sometimes our inaction is our role as well. But
That's right.
I always wonder, and like I said, I don't want to go off on a rabbit hole at this moment, but I always wonder what it is that brought the people to the place they are in terms of their desperation or the actions that they're taking
Yes.
that lead to war, those kinds of things. So maybe we can come back to that. One of the things that really I hear so much, and I'd love to talk about it just a little bit, is this idea that to be pro-Palestinian is to be anti-Semitic. I mean, I don't know, I think that's a propaganda piece, but maybe we could talk about that just a little bit, because I think people are scared to speak up about Gaza or take it on because of how they'll be judged by others as then being automatically anti-Semitic.
Yeah, absolutely. It's such an important thing for us to talk about because I think we do need to be clear that we are supportive and we want wholeness and safety and dignity for, our Jewish siblings. We want that for all people. And we recognize that Jewish people are vulnerable in a lot of areas of the world. I mean, even in the US, under the current rhetoric, we've seen some periods where violence against Jewish folks is increasing, and that's completely unacceptable. I think sometimes we transfer that idea to, the nation state of Israel. And because we want to be supportive, because we look back on the Holocaust with horror, as we should, we don't want to see that again. And so we have this desire to protect them, to be on the right side, to say this is something that should never happen again, and that's right. But I think it's just such an oversimplification of what's happening. I've had people in my life, we'll simplify it down. I've had people in my life that I love dearly and I want good things for. And I can also recognize that there are periods where their behavior is totally unacceptable. And it doesn't mean that I stop wanting good things for them or that I don't want them to turn around, but that there are times when people or nation states have turned their backs on what the original dream was for safety. And I think it's important to have that clarification that you can want good things for Jewish people and for Israelis, and to say that the forced starvation and the genocide in Gaza is not acceptable, and that we don't want to tolerate it. Maybe for Americans, Not that there are only listeners. Hello, international listeners. We know you're here. But maybe for Americans, a way for us to frame it is to think about what was happening to Indigenous folks in the U.S. when white folks
Mhm.
started to colonize here, and what Indigenous people were put through. A lot of people are just waking up to the realities of what happened, the way the land was stolen, the violence, the genocide that was attempted here. That's really not dissimilar to what's happening with Palestinians. I mean, there's a colonizer group that's coming in that needs and wants space, and that's resulting in a lot of violence. I think we can support Jewish folks and Israelis and want good things for them and want the genocide to stop for Palestinians to have dignity and self-determination.
Yeah, you use a phrase about the Jewish people deserving safety and
Yeah.
well-being and that kind of thing, but so does every people deserve,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
And we profess to believe in the worth of all persons, and so and in we're in this process of attempting to make the reign of God present on earth. Well, that happens when there is equal treatment
Yeah.
of everyone, equality, and all of those things. And I know some of those things can be broken down and say, well, what does that really mean? But I think a dignity and a certain level of preservation of life and liberty and all, those things that we as a nation value, but we tend to value it as long as it applies to us. And
Yeah.
we've got to look at this from a gospel perspective as much larger than that.
Yes.
So
Yeah. I think one of the other things that gets confusing for some folks, and we do see this in propaganda, talking about the distinction between, you know, between being critical of Israel's current actions and being anti-Semitic. One of the things that kind of is confounding for some folks, is the fact that the nation of Israel is using that term Israel. And as Christians, that shows up a lot in our text. I'm a lover of the Old Testament. The God,
yeah,
the God of justice and righteousness that I encounter there is a big part of what brings me to my interest in what's happening here. Um, but we need to be super clear that the Israel that's talked about in our scriptures, and when we sing, especially around Christmas time, a lot of our hymns talk about Israel. We're not talking about the current nation state. We're talking about a people that we have a shared history with and experience with our spiritual ancestors, a people that we want. We have a deep, deep connection to, but that's not the same as the current, nation. That's where we are, and so we want to be clear with ourselves in our singing and in our scripture and our prayer life that though they share a name, it's not the same group. It would be really cool if
yeah,
if the Israelites in the Bible had done really well for themselves and, continued on. But that's not what's happening here. Really, the nation of Israel is relatively young. I know I already shocked you with this fact earlier, Blake, but something that I've been kind of talking to people out about to help them frame this idea of, being against Israel's actions is not the same as being anti-Semitic, is that actually our current sitting president, Donald Trump, is older than the nation of Israel. So Donald Trump was born in June of 1946, and the UN's decision, the vote to partition Palestine to make room for Israel, that vote was taken in late 1947. And then the Nakba, as the Palestinians call it, the catastrophe, the sort of a trail of tears in a way, the removal of people from their homeland, an immense amount of suffering that occurred in early 1948. So Donald Trump is actually older than the nation of Israel. So when we say these are not the same people, really in the long view of history, this is pretty new. This is really pretty new, and so I think that kind of helps undo the idea that it's too complicated to come up with a solution where Israelis and Palestinians both have safety and dignity. I think
yeah.
that's
That's
possible.
as you mentioned, when you told me that statistic, it was shocking. And then, just to think about, there are lots of people who are currently living who are
Right.
older than that. And that is that the state of Israel is the result of decisions made by a group of people who were in power at the time.
Yes. Right.
Uh, so it is completely different. And yet, I think it's being used in a lot of ways to show the revelation is coming true, that this
Sure.
revelation being lived out. And we
Yeah.
need to be really, really careful about that.
We do. I mean, I was raised in a evangelical tradition. I've talked about that quite a bit on this podcast, and I do think that some of this mentality, the prevailing mindset, the apocalyptic feeling that we all have does kind of buy into this like overall evangelical idea. And so it is really difficult, depending on where what your faith is rooted in. I do think it's really difficult to separate yourself from this idea, to start kind of looking at some of the clear facts that show us that, just as you said, this happened because of decisions, which means that we can anytime, including today, start deciding to do something different here, right?
Right, right. And yet, what is happening today is that, and this is where, when I did my little search for Gaza today to find out why it wasn't in my feed anymore, I immediately came on an article that extended the statistics just from the point of the ceasefire, and saying that there were over 900 deaths of women and children just since the ceasefire went into place. And that's in the middle of a ceasefire.
Right,
How many a day? I didn't take the time to figure out how many a day that is, or
right,
an average, but any one is too many. And
right.
so 900, and that there are daily incursions still into Gaza, where they're trying to resettle. New
Hmm.
settlements are going in and
Yes,
continuing to displace. This is happening now. We could make some decisions, as you said. We could
yes,
make some decisions that would change that, and yet it's continuing to happen. Our attention in the U.S. is now focused somewhere else, right? And like we've talked about already, the news cycle helps direct our attention to that.
yeah.
But I wonder, if we were to kind of sit down and even brainstorm, how many things have we moved on from that are still real issues that need a solution?
Right. That's right. Yeah. And it is hard not to be so caught up in the news cycle and every single thing that needs our attention, because this isn't the only issue that needs our attention. I think for me it's the scale of the suffering that is so disturbing. I mean, who of us hasn't, studied history and looked back on things and thought, if I was there, I would have what? And I ask
Right.
myself that. I ask myself that, Linda, you're watching a genocide. People are being starved to death. What are you doing? I get on my podcast with my friend Blake, and we're going to talk about it. We those of us who look back with concern on history, we can ask ourselves now what we should be doing, and not get lost in the desperation, because there are decisions, and there are bills right now before the House and the Senate both, that would materially improve things for people in Gaza right now.
What are those bills? I know we've talked a little bit about them. Maybe now would be a good time to just lift those up. We're
Sure.
going to talk about, before we close out, just some actions we can take. But just since you've mentioned that, let's
Sure.
talk a minute about those bills.
Yeah. So there's a couple of things that Palestinians and churches for Middle East peace are lifting up as kind of immediate needs. One of them will be kind of familiar probably to listeners. There's some funding, for short, we call it UNRWA, because, oh gosh, what is the long spelled out thing? It's something like United Nations Relief something. Of course, I can't think of it now. We can look it up and we can probably put it in the show notes. But UNRWA is one of the primary, if not the primary, provider of humanitarian aid to Palestinians, particularly refugees in refugee camps. And the U.S. is one of the major funders of UNRWA. I believe this was actually prior to this new administration taking over, but UNRWA's funding has been completely gutted, essentially. The United States has stopped funding the relief and humanitarian aid, a lot of it going to the Middle East, Gaza, West Bank, Jordan, Lebanon, Syria. We're no longer supporting that, and we are supposed to be a superpower for good. The world needs this UNRWA funding. It's actually a really small amount when you look at how much it costs each of us individually. It's like a couple of bucks per American if you do the math, right? And I'll happily pay that because I want Palestinian kids to eat. But there's a pause on the funding for that. And so there's a House bill, and there may be a Senate component to it as well. But it's called UNRWA Funding Emergency Restoration Act of 2025. So the fact that it's named of 2025 tells you how long the people, we keep talking about people who can make decisions. The people who can make decisions have had this in front of them for some time. So something that, individually we need to do is hold accountable our legislators and ask them to restore that funding. That alone would have a significant impact, just thinking about the suffering, right? The starvation that's happening. I mean, we're also talking about, hygiene items. We're talking about basic medical supplies. I mean, just the things that you need to have in order to have a dignified life. That's something that, we should be having some action on. The other piece of legislation is called Block the Bombs Act. And this is specifically calling on the U.S. to stop transferring certain bombs, tank ammunitions, and white phosphorus to Israel because we know that they are being used to commit war crimes. It is a fact, and it's not a comfortable fact, that U.S. weapons have been directly linked to civilian deaths in Gaza. There's a documentary I watched recently, which I think we'll talk about later, where you can watch this individual story talking about how I think it was an F-16, but I'm not good with planes. Their aunt's house ends up being bombed, and they were able to identify, the plane that had done that was a piece of U.S. equipment. I believe it was an Israeli pilot, but U.S. provided equipment. We have control over where our money goes and what we sell and give to Israel. And I think that we can decide that this is not what we want. You've seen probably those T-shirts, "We can't bomb our way to peace." And I think this act will not fix it alone, but it will be a big step toward having a much more humane conflict. It can't be the end of our conversation, but those are two really important pieces that are in front of our legislators right now that should have our attention and deserve a bit of our time for some research.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm afraid that a lot of these things get held up because they try to put so many riders on the thing. So when they have a bill, it looks like, oh, I should be for that. And but they tack things on to try to get them in under the wire. So, I mean, I know that holds up the process, but I guess I wish that we could just have a system where you ask for what you want. And then we ask, do we do another bill for the other piece? But I know that's not the way our politics work these days.
Yeah.
But hopefully we can, with the encouragement that you're talking about to our legislators, and that we can try to help these things go through, because this is not the only funding that has been cut for humanitarian aid across the spectrum. So
we need to talk about the loss of the USAID funding and what's crises that are happening around the world. I mean, the U.S. has built a reputation of being a reliable partner in humanitarian aid and efforts, and that's something. I actually grew up in a military family. Majority of my family are veterans, and I'm proud of that. But I think I always viewed us as a force for good. We've done a lot of really good work historically, and I think we need to get back to that. I think that's one of the best versions of us is when we're making sure that our brothers and sisters around the world have the things that they need.
Yes, I'm going to resist the urge to go into the list of other things too, because we could get way off topic. But just suffice it to say that there's lots of work to be done.
That's right.
I want us to take some time to talk a little bit about your letter, because we talk about actions. I think the church is often hesitant to put something in writing. I actually was in a meeting not too long ago and heard someone say, because of where they live, they have to be careful about what they put in writing and how it be used. And yet you took a bold step as a mission center president. Maybe, I don't know, for our listeners, we might need to just explain, what that means, what your role is in Michigan. But you took a step to write a letter to the mission center to lift this up. I maybe if you wouldn't mind, before we get to the letter, just tell a little bit about the mission center president role as it exists in Michigan, because it
Sure.
differs, some. And then I want you to read from the letter.
Sure. Yeah. The Michigan Mission Center is a little unique. It's big geographically, and we also have a large number of congregations. So, part of my job as Mission Center president is, to be the administrator and decision maker on business things. And I have a CFO that I work with to manage those financial things. We have 60 congregations, 3 campgrounds, and a campus ministry center. So we have a pretty complicated operation up here. But we also have some of the best people. And we have had a lot of space to be courageous about what our prophetic voice means. So when I went to seminary, I really was, I went to Ecumenical Theological Seminary in Detroit, and they talk about themselves as being rooted in the prophetic tradition in Detroit, which is, of course, rooted in the civil rights movement. And that's what drew me there, was this idea that the church has something to offer the public sphere, that people look to us to be a voice of moral reason, that my relationship with God compels me to speak when things are not right. And the people in Michigan have been really responsive as we've come up with different letters on a variety of topics that where the world around us kind of intersects with our enduring principles in a way that's not comfortable. I mean, we should, as people living the enduring principles, should look on this issue, in Gaza and be uncomfortable because of what we believe. And so part of my role is also to provide some spiritual direction, some missional direction, and something I'm trying and learning to do is to provide something in writing that gives congregations a jumping off point to start having conversations in our buildings about the hard things. So we did one last year in January of 25 after President Trump had signed, I think it was an executive order saying there's only 2 genders, which was probably intentionally to be inflammatory, because I think he just likes to do that. But I had issued a letter after that said, hey, gender diversity is a blessing. And we are better because of our non-binary siblings and our trans siblings. And I have found that when you make these kind of big decisions and you're willing to put something in writing and put your name on it, you're always going to get like 2 emails that are upset, because it is hard when we have these conversations. But truthfully, as a leader, I have found that people really appreciate these resources. People want to engage with the world around them, with their faith and their relationship with God as their lens. It's been really fun to me to be able to provide some of these and see how congregations, choose to respond or interact with it. So I had a couple of folks that helped me on the resource that we put out about Gaza. I'll give them a shout out. Angel Foster, Mike Tu, and Adam Bouveret worked on this document with me. And it's something that we're just trying to do periodically is provide resources for congregations to navigate this weird context that we're in, to have some really good tools. There's a lot of topics, including Gaza, where the church has actually made some statements and had some World Conference resolutions. I mean, we have the receipts. It's past time for us to be prophetic in our voice and be loud. This fits very well with who we are. And if you look at the letter that we put together, you'll see some of the Community of Christ resources as kind of our receipts. I think this has been one of the more rewarding parts of my job is to be able to kind of look a little bit deeper at what our faith calls us to be out in the public sphere.
Well, I would just say, thank you for your courage. As a person who served as a mission center president for a number of years, I never did anything like this. I mean, I preach about it, teach about it, talk about it, engage in conversations, but this bold step, and I think as a church, that's relatively new for us as well.
Yeah.
in the last maybe 5 to 10 years, putting out statements and a little more frequently as we move forward. So it's really helpful. One of the things that I think probably your relationship with the Michigan people is so important, and the way you preface the letter, um, I really appreciate, and I think that's something that we can all learn from and hold on to. You said that the purpose of the letter and the attached resources is to encourage us to have necessary and difficult discussions and to better understand why this matters. Um, Not necessarily to come to agreement, not necessarily, for any purpose other than to begin to understand and to
That's
hear
right.
one another, which is at the core of who we are.
Yeah.
Uh, I think people are afraid to engage because they feel they'll be judged. But if we always avoid the conversation, then nothing happens. Bills sit for months and months or years or get shelved or whatever. So,
That's right.
really, really, really appreciate that and feel a little guilty as the former Mission Center president for not having. I don't know that I didn't have the courage to do it. It just wasn't done a lot, and maybe I should have set the precedent. But um, anyway, so I deeply appreciate that. I would you start start, we've already begun talking about the letter, but there's a quote that you refer to in your letter from the UNICEF executive director Catherine Russell. Can you read that for us, and then let's talk about that a little bit?
Sure. Yeah. The the quote is from the UNICEF executive director, and she's speaking to the UN Security Council. And this is from July of 2024. So we would have been, what, 8, 9 months past the escalation that started in 2023 after the Hamas attacks. Um, but it's also been almost 2 years ago. And so she's reporting that children in Gaza were being killed at a rate of more than one child. Whew, it's actually kind of hard to say.
Yes.
One child per hour during the height of the conflict. She told the Security Council over the past 21 months of war, more than 17,000 children have reportedly been killed and 33,000 injured in Gaza. An average of 28 children have been killed each day, the equivalent of an entire classroom. Consider that for a moment, a whole classroom of children killed every day for nearly 2 years. These are not mere numbers. These are beloved children of God, each with names, dreams, and families who mourn them.
That is an incredibly breathtaking, stunning, disruptive. I can't even, there's so many things come to mind, statistics and quote. Um, First of all, I picked up, you said that this was from July 2024, which we think about the hostility starting in October 2023, which you've been clear that was not the start, that was an escalation.
That's right.
And yet the quote says over the past 21 months. So, I mean, goes far beyond October 2023,
That's right.
17,000 children. But when I hear 28, an average of 28 each day, the equivalent of one classroom, and I think about the absolute hysteria and outrage and all that happens when we have a school shooter
Yeah.
in the United States where there may be a few children, and there have been that have been killed, and that's horrible.
Yeah.
But to think a whole classroom of children every day.
Every day for 21 months. This goes back to what we talked about earlier. It's the scale of the devastation, the suffering. I mean, you cannot look at those. I hope you can't look at those statistics and not have your just breath sucked right out of you. I have to believe that most people do not understand the scale of the suffering, the death that's happening. Most people are reasonable and good, and when you tell them this is the type of devastation that's happening, I mean, it's truly shocking. Um, maybe this goes back to the conversation we had earlier about some of this content being, suppressed. I think this is why these conversations are so important for us to be honest. And that is a prophetic responsibility, to be honest and to tell the truth about situations of injustice. And this is the truth of the situation of the injustice that's happening in Gaza.
Yeah. So staggering is one of the other words
Good
that
word.
that I had no idea. I mean, I knew it was bad. And when I
Hmm.
read your letter and read that quote and thought, I mean, that puts it in such a concrete, visible way of understanding that just raises it to a different level for me
Yeah.
because I
Yeah.
mean, this has been important. Um, and I've been struggling with this, but I didn't even have, as much as I've been reading, I didn't have an idea of how catastrophic, the
Yeah.
loss is
It's
when you look at
disturbing.
it that way. And as a parent and a grandparent, I mean, I can't even
Yeah.
imagine. I
No,
can't.
I can't either.
It's heartbreaking and it's overwhelming. I want to acknowledge that for our listeners. This is overwhelming. This is
Yes.
overwhelming. And, we say, gosh, what am I supposed to do from my office in Chicagoland area where I am? What can I possibly do? I've got all this going on. Well, Linda has some ideas. And we've talked a little bit about that. It's just, I mean, even the education and awareness
Yeah.
and lifting up that this has not gone away and that we need to still be mindful of it in the midst of all the other
Yeah.
things that are also being pushed under the rug, swept under the rug. That's um, we can't let those kinds of things happen. We have some responsibilities as followers of Jesus,
That's
the
right.
peaceful one, and the mandate to care for the poor and the oppressed and the captives and all of that, regardless. And it's going to require, I think, us getting uncomfortable and trying to tap into some empathy for the other side. As
Yeah.
I mentioned earlier, every time one of these things happens, or an event like this happens, or it's a school shooting or whatever, I can't help but wonder what is it that drove that individual or that group to feel so desperate that they thought this is the only way to solve the problem or
Sure.
to find relief. Um, there's always two sides to a story. So,
Yeah.
and you've mentioned just the bit about U.S. weapons being used, maybe not directly by us, but they're provided by us and
Right.
used for those purposes. So we do have a role in it. Uh,
Yes, we do. Yeah. And the letter, the making posts on Facebook, having the conversations at the Thanksgiving dinner table, they're awkward and they're hard, but they are important. We need to keep it in front of people's attention because it is so easy to lose that. And then we also can't leave it there. I mean, talking about it is huge. But you and I could sit here and probably scratch each other's backs for most of the afternoon talking about how angry we are about what's
right.
happening. And so how do we get out of our desks, out of our congregations and do something about it? Um, I think that there's a few things. Definitely, I want to encourage people to get involved with the legislative process and get to know their legislators. I know it seems awkward, but usually when you call, the person you're going to get is like a 23-year-old intern. They talk to people all day, and you will not be the least informed person they talk to. So there's no reason to be like embarrassed about calling your legislator's office or to feel insecure about it, although I completely understand why people do. I would be happy to share a resource we have. We call it the Faith in Action Guide, and it has a script that you can follow for if you're making a phone call to your legislator's office. And so for some folks, that might be helpful. I strongly suggest that we call our legislators every single day and ask them to advance the two bills that we talked about earlier to block the bombs and restoring the funding to UNRWA. There's some other bills that you could get involved with. There's another one. Oh, it's related to the East Jerusalem Hospital Network, and asking them to open a humanitarian corridor so the individuals in Gaza can actually access hospitals, because there's extremely isolated from access to that type of humanitarian aid. So I still believe that, harassing our legislators is really important. I don't think they should have peace while they have power and our trust. We vote for them, we employ them, and so I don't think that legislators should have peace while we have children dying every day, and we know that we have different options. So I think getting involved in the political process is really important. But as you mentioned earlier, we really need to build empathy and understanding on all sides. Um, I think one of the most important things we can do is probably find a way to connect with individual Palestinians' stories and start to see and understand Palestinians as a culture and people that are capable of and entitled to self-determination. One of the TikTok has its ups and downs, but one of the things I do enjoy about TikTok, maybe enjoy is not the right word, appreciate about TikTok, is that I can actually search and engage with someone's live from their tent in Gaza. I have a couple of people that I follow, and they go live regularly. You kind of start to see how their kids grow, or changes in their lives, things that are happening. I think it's really important for us to see folks in all kinds of suffering as individuals. When you think about what does the prophetic voice do, it isn't just being the voice, but we have to go and be on the margins. Not all of us can fly to Gaza tomorrow, but we can get to know individuals. There's also an organization that I want to lift up, that is an organization of Palestinian Christians in America. It's called the American Federation of Ramallah, Palestine. And so this has a relationship to the Ramallah Christians in Palestine, and it's an organization to support the diaspora of Palestinian Christians across the U.S. They're actually their physical base is in Michigan, which is how I got connected to them. But they have locations and communities all over the U.S. I think this could be a really powerful way for us to start to build relationships and empathy and understanding for what's happening. The last suggestion that I'll make is, we keep calling it the podcast. So, or not the podcast, the documentary, but it does have a name. And I want to encourage folks to go and watch this because it is so personal. It's called Gaza is Our Home. And you can just find it on YouTube. Gaza is Our Home. And it is a documentary. It's about an hour long, but it really follows the story of a particular family. So I think it's a brother interviewing his sister, and their family's Palestinian. So they're kind of talking through some of the impacts of their family. You see pictures of their family experience, some of what their family has experienced. And for us to really, I think, humanize that, can help us to build that empathy. I think it pulls us away from the exhaustion of feeling like it's something that's too complicated or can't be done. Gosh, it seems like there's probably lots of other things that I could think of on any other day, but those would be my top suggestions. Building our empathy, building relationships with Palestinians, and getting involved in the political process. We have a lot more power and influence than we give ourselves credit for.
Yeah, I also want to encourage going to those resources where you can see the stories, whether it's on the TikTok live feed or whether it's the Gaza is Our Home, which is a great place to start. Because I know, at least for me, I can read things, I can hear people talk about things from a third person perspective, etc. But when I see or hear from someone who is living in the midst of it,
Yeah,
it gives me just a deeper understanding and a move toward that empathy that you're talking about, because I think that's crucial to us making a difference. As long as we don't tap into that, we can justify and rationalize that that's somebody else's issue.
that's right.
And as a people who believe in the worth of all persons and Um, we just have to be mindful. I mean, we have revelation for the church as well as Old Testament scripture. In their welfare lies your welfare.
That's
It's
right.
not just part of Community of Christ tradition. It is part of the larger church tradition, and it is so true. Also want to step back for just one second, just back to the calling your representatives or reaching out to your representatives, and I want to just kind of name another thing that I hear a lot, and I know you have an answer for it, Linda. And that is, so I call, and I'm one of a million people who calls every day. And not only do I not talk to the congressman, I talk to a 23-year-old who is just like there to answer the phones. What possible good could that do?
Sure. I am going to start with some advice that Steve Kellogg gave me, which I lifted up in a different episode, but it's worth repeating.
Yeah.
We met with a representative from actually my area who's extremely conservative, right? One of these people who is celebrating the defunding of UNRWA that we just talked about. And I left my meeting with her office really frustrated, like, God, what a waste of time. And they gave us their newest guy, and he probably put our notes in the circular bin. And I was kind of complaining to Steve Kellogg about it. And he said, you might be the only reasonable person he talks to this week. You may be the only person who comes through the door this week and talks to him about Gaza and what's happening. There are plenty of people who are calling and advocating for the very opposite of what we would suggest. Just the week before, there had been a much larger group there advocating for Israel. So I think that we also have to remember in that moment that we are ministering to the individual on the phone. A lot of these kids, these 23-year-olds, they grow up to be senators and chiefs of staff and foreign policy advisors. And we have an opportunity to put in front of them, even if it doesn't make a difference to the senator that you called that day, we do have an opportunity to put in front of that individual a different way of thinking. And you might be the only call they get that day, but chances are you're probably not. When we look at what it takes to make a difference in a legislator's mind, it really just takes a handful of calls. So if a congregation, here's an idea, if a congregation felt passionate about something, and not all congregations are geographical, but most of them are, everybody in, say, St. Clair County, all the congregations here, 3 congregations decide we're all going to call our senator once a week. I don't care if every congregation has 10 people. If 3 congregations of 10 people are calling their senator every week, that gets their attention. It feels like our individual voices aren't enough, but they make a difference. And we have access to community that a lot of people don't have, right? Like, it's not
Right.
just about the circle of my concern and the things that worry me, but the circle of my influence. And so together, when we, Community of Christ, even a tiny denomination, decide this is a problem for us, we have enough people for our senators, for our representatives to notice. If they're getting 10 calls a week about it, that's enough to get their attention. I think we should not discourage ourselves or each other from remembering the value of our voice. I think for me, it almost, even if it didn't make a difference in that senator's day, I think I sleep better at night knowing that I was clear about where I stood. That has value to me on my own. But as far as moving the issue forward, I think we don't want to downplay how much it means to make a phone call. I will say, from my conversations and experiences with people in the office, in the legislators' offices, a phone call is more valuable than an email. If you're new to it, an email feels like a safer way to step into it, and that's okay. They're still valuable. They get marked down and recorded. They keep track of how many emails they're getting on each topic. If you can get on the phone with a person, I think that's more effective than an email. But perfection is the enemy of good enough. So whatever is the next faithful step for you is where you should go from here. Do more research, understand the bills, learn how to email your senator and work your way up to calling them. Everybody taking one step forward is still a big advancement.
Great. Yeah, that's helpful. And I have held on to that thought since I heard you share it in preparation for the episode with Steve, and then in the episode because it is easy. Again, we can come up with a million excuses not to do something, and
Yeah.
certainly being one of a million phone calls that's just going to go in the round bin, like you said, a circular bin, I think you called it. Uh, the is like, why bother? I'm busy. But to think about it in terms of a ministry opportunity,
Yeah.
an opportunity just to put a plug in to spark a thought of a different perspective. Those
Yeah.
are ways we begin to make our way into bigger conversations, I think. So
I'm
really,
afraid this is a marathon. I don't think this is a sprint. I wish that we could solve this quickly in a few months and have peace in the region. I don't think that's the case. I think peace is achievable. Write that down. I think it's possible. I believe in it. But it's a marathon, so we are gonna have to stay kind of committed to it, and it's going to be probably those slow steps. So we don't let ourselves get discouraged, right? You kind of have to keep your eye focused on something bigger, and we can make a difference in the long run. I think I don't want to wait for peace. I want that to be a future thing, a future thing that's tomorrow's future. But I also think of, you just talked about Jeremiah and their welfare, leisure welfare.
yeah,
How long does Jeremiah wear that like dirty loincloth around town? I mean, it's not one day, right? I mean, he
right.
wears it around, it's some absurd length of time. Like, I think we know prophetic action doesn't usually happen on the first day. A lot of times it's this long commitment to wearing the loincloth around the town square for however long, but we can't tire of the work.
And beware, it's not always well received.
That's right. That's right.
Uh, you know, I've really appreciated this conversation, and I hope for our listeners, it may seem that Faith Unfiltered right now is focusing all of our attention in one area, and yes, we have committed to this series because it's important. But I hope that we'll also be able to take from these discussions the idea, several ideas. One of them being, just because a topic goes away from the news feed doesn't mean it's gone. And the ways in which we talk about taking action really apply across the board. There are bills on all kinds of issues out there. And so we hope that you'll be encouraged to take some steps toward action, even if it's, I guess, a conversation like this with
Yeah.
someone, and not necessarily someone who agrees with you. Now, Linda and I are pretty much on the same page here, but it's also important for us to have some conversations with people with other perspectives.
Yeah.
If nothing else, not to change our minds necessarily or necessarily to try to change theirs, but again, another opportunity to put in a perspective to make
Yeah.
us think differently. And because we think differently, then strengthen perhaps our position where we are, maybe make some shifts, maybe move toward the empathy that we talk about. So much that we can take from these things that aren't just focused in one topic.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
So we could probably go on and on for days, Linda. I could. I am fascinated by all that you have learned and picked up. I'm looking forward to going and watching Gaza is Our Home because I have not seen that yet. I am one person who is very moved by personal stories, so
Yeah.
uh, I'm looking forward to that. And we're going to post. I think you said it's okay for us to post the link to your letter in the show notes, and we'll do that. And we haven't mentioned, but in that letter, there is the letter, but there's also a list of resources and for going deeper and for independent study. So there's some resources that are just involved in that. And rather than putting them all individually in the show notes, we'll put a link to the letter. And again, thank you for having the courage to write the letter. So.
Yeah. Yeah. I hope lots of congregations will use it and start to have those difficult conversations. We know that's what moves us forward.
All
Well, I
right.
want to
You want to
thank
close us out?
Yeah, I want to thank everybody for letting us have this conversation together and for your time to step into a hard conversation. We thank you for your time and thanks for joining us for Grounds for Peace, a Faith Unfiltered podcast series. I'm Linda Stanbridge here with my friend Blake, and thanks for sharing your time with us. Go and make the world a better place.